My name is preceded by a title of LAIBONLE, which is L-O-I-B-O-N. This is Kimasai from East Africa, and it's like identifying me as a shaman or teacher or actually a medicine keeper. It's called LAIBONLE. My name is Oldoinyo Laitoli Le BAABA. Okay, it translates in two ways. BAABA, being father or teacher, the red lily from the mountain. That's the literal translation. But the inferred meaning of that is the teacher, a fount of consciousness from the ancestor. So this is a very mystical name that was given to me by the Maasai. Prior to that, I was raised Muslim, and so I have a very, very long Islamic name, which is Sufi in Persian and Arabic in base, and that was my name. But as a result of my growing up in different cultures and being exposed to different traditions, what I do now is simply try to help people to see things from a very basic, primitive, tribal type of way of thinking, which is not denying any philosophy. It's not in opposition to any religious precept. In fact, it incorporates every possible way of believing or thinking. But it does it in such a primitive fashion until immediately it becomes transcendent of any doctrine or dogma or set tradition or way of believing. My understanding is that there is no difference that's real. There is a difference that's relative. Duality is not duality in the sense of non-duality, but that's a relative definition. Ultimately, because all there is what is. That is cannot be divided and separated into being other than what it is. So while on the relative level, we need to definitely see the non-attachment to any particular precept or concept of reality. Okay? But that's not to say that we should avoid being attached to it. The problem is that we become attached to the attachment of whatever there is. So then we begin to see the separate reality, when in truth, reality is one. Existence is one. Life is one. But that oneness is so diverse and so multiple in its understanding until we have religions, we have philosophies, we have different sciences. But there's a key in the word religion which deals with understanding duality and non-duality, and that is the etymological root, the etymology of the word religion. Re meaning a prefix, to do again. Legion is taken from the Latin ligere, L-E-G-E-R-E, which literally means to rebind or to retie back. But then the question is, to what? To nothing. Not nothing, but no thing. Huh? And once you say that, you immediately are connected with everything. It's just a limitation and the condition or qualification that we place on whatever it is that we're referring to that allows that thing to be an obstacle instead of the opportunity that it's intended to be. Hence the problem with religion. We say that I am that I am because I am not. Because I am not, I am all that ever was, is, or can ever possibly be. Now, the way we understand that is that the I am, the great I am, is the state of being which is not a being, but a state of being, which you can call beingness or isness. And the I that perceives the I is the ego. And so that ego must cease to exist as real, but not cease to exist, but cease to exist as ultimately real and surrender to a reality greater than itself. Hence the I am that I am. And the I, which is the ego, must be not. And by it being not, then the I am is all there is, which encompasses every living thing. Not only the human being, the animal, the insect, the vegetable, the mineral, the element, the elemental, without exception, every star or moon or planet is part of that I am. We are not, generally, we are not able or willing to grasp that reality that is appearing so abstract. We want to anthropomorphize it. We want to deify it. We want to qualify it as being this and not that. This is why I love the Sanskrit phrase, which in this conference you've heard many times, neti neti, but it's followed by eti eti. Neti neti, not this, not that, but eti eti, not this, and not that. So, this is the problem with I, me and my, contrary to you, your, and yours. It's an illusion. It's a state of ignorance. It's avidya that leads to this. And it's not wrong. It's not right. It's not good. It's not bad. It's whatever it needs to be in order to bring us to where we need to be and how we need to be. So the cliche is, it's all good. Whatever it is, it's okay. No matter how un-okay, no matter how not okay it is, it's okay. It's a process. There are no accidents. Ultimately, there's no wrong or right. I rephrase, ultimately. Relatively, there is very much that is right and wrong. And we need to correct that. Relatively. As beings living in a three-dimensional realm, we can only do what we can do, made up of a first and second and third dimensional reality. As we get into the fourth dimensional and other dimensional realities, then we find less meaning and less restrictive significance of the third dimensional reality that we are so comfortable with. We are not the doer. We are that which is the instrument of the doer. Now, this brings us to understanding the difference between relative and absolute reality, or relative and ultimate reality. Relatively, we are the only doer. Relatively. Ultimately, we're what's done. We're the instrument, and that's all we are. There's everything to do. In fact, there's even more to do. We must do all we can do in every way possible to do it, using whatever is available to make the change, to grow, to learn, to evolve, to involve in order that we may better evolve. We must make every possible effort for that. But don't be attached to your effort. Don't be attached to the outcome of your action. Selflessly, egolessly act without the attachment to the result of your actions, good or bad, right or wrong. Just be the best you can be. Do the very best you can do. Nowhere. Because it's going everywhere. Mathematics explains this very beautifully. In geometry, there's an area of geometry that becomes meta-geometry. And in that, you have finite numbers representing finite reality, and you have infinite numbers representing an infinite reality. Okay. One is measurable, which is commensurable. One is beyond measurement, which is incommensurable. These are represented by pi and phi. This is mathematical terminology for that. So that shows us that, yes, there is the finite, but the finite is only part of the infinite, which has no purpose. It's purposeless in its purpose. It's causeless in its cause. It is. Theosophy calls this the state of sat, or the state of beingness, versus a being. Tribal people, indigenous and aborigine people, we live according to something called animism. Animism is, well, in the Western world, we're taught that there's animate and inanimate, living and non-living. Animism perceives, understands, or believes that there is no non-living. It all lives. Everything. Everything in this room is alive. But then we take it another level. It's not only living, it's intelligent. It's not only intelligent, it feels, it thinks, it knows. Because it is only part of that which is and always has been. You see. We don't believe that there's literally any time of creation, nor will there be literally any time of destruction. It's all cyclic. It's all cyclic. Okay. And so because of that, we're at peace. We have an inner sense of peace and unity with everything. There's no death. There's only change. There's no birth. There's only change. Now, I use physics to try to explain this to the Western world. And there I use the first law of thermodynamics, which says that matter or energy can never be created or destroyed, but only transformed. E equals mc squared. All matter is energy, and all energy is matter. And if neither can be created or destroyed, but only transformed, then when does it cease to be? When did it ever begin to be? In tribal thinking, we see life as a cycle. And that cycle is the experiential cycle of the ancestor. Western culture calls it God. Other cultures call it whatever. But for us, it's the ancestor, because the ancestor never dies. It lives. In fact, I don't exist. The ancestor is what lives. I'm only the messenger. I'm only the carrier of that which has come before me. That's all I am. You see? And so therefore the ego is a necessary part of our being, but it is not a part that identifies our being. That is the lower ego. The higher ego is an ego that is an identity of all beings, without exception. So there's also no, in tribal culture, we have no sense of equality or inequality. There's equanimity, balance, but that encompasses imbalance. You cannot have the light without dark. You cannot have up without down, or right without left, or hot or sweet without cold and sour. It coexists. You cannot have negation without affirmation. Affirmation requires negation, and negation requires affirmation. So what is versus what isn't? It's the yin and yang. The same. Not the same as same, but the same as sameness. See, this is where we get caught up in thinking that there is a same. Nothing is the same. Nothing is same. But there is sameness. You and I are different as day and night, but the life is one. The consciousness is one. The soul is one. Now, our process of life is to awaken to that. So then the question that follows is, then is there enlightenment? Not in the sense that we generally think of it, but in its true sense of being in the light. Enlightenment is being in the light. Well, all there is light, which is not separate from darkness. So it's nothing to achieve. There's nothing to acquire. There's nothing to accomplish. We are that. The only process is to realize that, to become aware, and then to accept it. To accept it and then live it. That's the challenge, is to live what we are, to live who and what we are. It's not that we have to become anything. And those that refuse to live or to learn it, those that refuse to be it, they're expendable. As it was once said by a great teacher, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. The other half of what he said was, I'm talking of Malik al-Hajj Shabazz, which is commonly known as Malcolm X. The other part of that which people don't want to remember is that he said, if you are to liberate, you need to educate. So education feeds liberation. But if one chooses and refuses to not be educated, and hence does not accept being liberated, then that person must be eliminated by any means necessary. Now that's hardcore. That sounds cruel, but it's the law of nature. Anything that threatens the survival of the whole is compromising the existence of the whole, and therefore it's expendable. There are two principles that govern the universe: universal law and universal order. Any person, place, or thing that breaks and refuses to abide by universal law, not man law, universal law, is inevitably destroyed by universal order. You want to see verification of this? You want to see the proof of this? Turn on Nature Channel. Turn on National Geographic and watch what the animals do. Watch how nature preserves itself. Then we say, oh, well, yeah, but we're human beings. They're animals. Are we superior? No. No. There is no superior or inferior, except what the ego wants to identify. Is language a barrier in tribal society? No, because we don't depend on language. We simply depend on the experience, which is the language for us. It's not a verbal communication, but it is a living translation of reality. We live it. We envelop ourselves so deeply into the process of living until there is no interpretation, there is no translation necessary. You experience it. Whether it's hunting and gathering or dealing with what is called death. It's the same to us. It's all a ritual. It's all ceremony. Which is why some of us in the tribal or in the indigenous community live the way we live and do the things we do. Hence, headhunting, cannibalism, circumcision, male and female. These things are very difficult to explain to the Western mind because it's so primal and basic in its reasoning and in its function that the Western mind, in its positivistic thinking, its pragmatic, practical, logical way of looking at it, its linear and empirical way of understanding, finds it very, very difficult to understand tribal ways of life. And that's what I'm here for, is to try to break those barriers of communication, to try to find a way to translate that which is not translatable, to share that which is almost impossible to share without the experience. But I try to find a way to still help people to relate, if not to accept, to at least appreciate, and to not judge, and to not deem as evil or negative or less civilized, cultured, or less purposeful or meaningful. That's my job. You see an insect like the praying mantis. When they copulate, and at the end of their copulation, she decapitates the male. The black widow spider, she conceives, and when the eggs hatch, she feeds the male to the eggs, to the young hatchlings. This is nature's way of preserving and maintaining the psyche for the benefit of the whole at the price of the one or the few. Now, in tribal culture, the way that we think is very primitive in the sense that it's very primal for survival. And it's the survival of the whole that is most important. Every individual is a potential sacrifice for the benefit, the well-being, and the health of the whole. Now, this is kind of like a general understanding amongst indigenous people, to the point to where when we have our tribal conflicts, we go into conflict without trying to avert being killed. We go into the conflict to kill, but if we are killed, the exhilaration of acceptance is almost as great. In fact, it's greater than if we do the killing. Because when we are killed, we are sacrificing our individuality to become one with the ancestral totality of existence, which sustains everything. So this is the greatest honor. It's an honor to join the ancestors, you see. And so our head is taken back to the village of the taker. It's ceremonially decorated and kept into the main living space of the family of the taker. And in some cases, the head elder of the family sleeps on the skull as a pillow to absorb all of the energy, because the life force energy is still there. And that life force energy sustains life. It feeds life. Life feeds life. Death is part of life. It's a cycle. It's a cyclic aspect of life. But when that head is taken, the liver or the heart is also eaten to carry on the DNA, the stamina, the strength of that great warrior that just sacrificed his physical being, because the life force is seen to be one. And in that same sense, when we kill an animal, our thinking is that I take you today, you take me tomorrow. And as we take each other, we join together in the great ancestral kingdom of life itself. So there's no superior or inferior. There's no taker or taken. This is the way we think. This is the way we think. And it has many ramifications. It has to do with the way we live, the way we die, the ceremonial way that we deal with the dead and the living, the way we deal with the ecology, the way that we totally see an inseparateness of I and me and my and you and your and yours. So it's an honor. Whatever we do to each other, it's a privilege. Totally different way of thinking.